And I think we now have a quorum, so I'm going to call us to order. Good late morning, everyone. Not quite afternoon yet. All right, so I'll call to order our September 4th Opioid Settlement Fund Task Force. Second item is for the clerk to please call the roll.
All right, Chair Strebs.
Sorry, yes. I thought you were just saying like, oh, right, I'll do it, Chair Strebs. Yes, I'm here, thank you.
Chair Ray is not here. Vice Chair Pro Tem Hepler. Commissioner Morales. Director Rutherford.
So visual is not enough, obviously. It's gotta be verbal. I'm here.
Preferably. For the recording. Dr. Nettleton.
Present.
Director Bobo. Sheriff Fuller. Sarah Green. Here. Director Gray. Or DEI representative.
Here.
Susan Davis. Nicole Storteboom.
Present.
Dr. Ford.
Here.
Brenda Henry.
Here.
Mr. Gladstone.
Present.
April Anders. You have 9 present.
Oh,
Who did Nancy replace?
Mr. Leroy Gray.
You have 10 present.
Good, thank you, Nancy. Yes. Yes. All right, well, thank all of you for making time and being here with us today. I did hear from Ms. Anders, who will not be with us today, and Board Chair Tammy Ray is out after the birth of her son in the wee hours on Friday. So hopefully some of our other members will be able to join us as we make our way today. Item number 3 is review and approval of the minutes. I would entertain a motion.
I motion to approve.
Support.
All right, motion by Ms. King, supported by Director Rutherford. Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you for that. Item 4, we'll move to public comment. This is the opportunity for members of the public to address the Opioid Settlement Fund Task Force. You have up to 3 minutes. Please share your name and where you reside. You have up to 3 minutes. Seeing no members coming forward. Dina, do we have anyone online that wishes to address the body?
Sure, there are no hands raised.
Good, thank you so much. All right, we will close public comments. I'll move us to item 5, discussion as we begin. So I want to draw our attention, trying to move us through the questions that we have yet to address. We've identified roughly a time frame for our discussion points. So I'd like to just encourage the body to think through your thoughts, to be concise and to stick to the item addressed within the question. We'll have opportunity to have additional discussion as needed. But let's take us into item 5A, which is question number 4. So here we wanted to wrap up discussion on what timeline should the county operate on for releasing funding to the community. So we're thinking, when should granting portal be open? Is there alignment when other funding opportunities are released that should be considered in that timeline? So I'll open that up to discussion and thoughts from the body.
Did we have all the details in terms of what amounts that we were going to be looking at So, I mean, that might have an impact on the timeline for people trying to pull their grants together.
We don't have any guardrails yet on the amounts. And so do you have some insight, longer time frame needed for larger grants, or, what would be your thoughts and related to that?
I think having enough detail that when it's put out there, I think we need to know what that RFP looks like. There's, all that set up prior to being able to release a date. So we're not like scrambling to try to get the detailed information out there. And I don't think we have that information yet.
Ms. Henry?
So, in the packet that we received, it was the mini grant process overview. And can someone please elaborate on that as it pertains to the question that you just put on the floor?
Thank you, Ms. Henry. So the mini grant awards, the county commission made an allocation of $250,000 out of our overall pot of opioid resources to go out into the community for urgent needs while this task force continues its work. So it's an update to the task force, sort of understanding the packet of materials that's going to the community foundation. It's, I believe, next Tuesday. Is that correct, Deputy Administrator, that applications will open? And those are up to $30,000. Those are annual grants, and that will open this coming week. Okay. But what we want to have discussion here is the rest of the resources that we have on an annual basis. What is the grant timeline? Is there a good time of the year because of other grant windows that are open that we want to do the work at the same time, or that's cumbersome to do it at the same time? Our annual cycle is good. Is a 3-year cycle better so that there's more planning opportunity? That's sort of the input that we're looking for. Director Bobo?
I think that it should be a flowing cycle throughout the year, maybe major grants. I think I probably said this before. I'm just going to reaffirm it. A couple of times a year for major grants. A lot of us write major grants, and we're slammed at the general major grant timeline that everybody wants them, especially the feds and the state. So I think it would be nice to have a second major grant timeline in there that we could work on and not be jammed so tightly with another major grant. Maybe smaller grants could cycle through every 3 months, smaller to be defined. And in terms of the length of the grants, I think 1 year and 3 year would be appropriate terms. 1 year for, hate to use ill-defined terms, but general grants, and grants that have a long-term project could slide into a three-year grant better, because it's going to take time to spin those up and bring them fully online.
When you're identifying that struggle with the major grant cycles for federal and state funding, what time of the year do those happen?
Generally due October 1st. Some state grants are also due in March. Ms. Green also writes a lot of federal grants and state grants.
I would add, ours are usually due, our federal grants and state grants are usually due May timeframe, and then they're awarded October 1st. So we do all the writing in April and May, and then we have to wait through the summer months to find out if we get the funds awarded for October 1st start time.
Okay. Director Rutherford?
I think that whatever the frequency is determined, think about the process itself in terms of scoring, in terms of the Board of Commissioners involvement. And so while I appreciate the openness of it's open 365 days a year, it may be that you have to batch some of these and really address them on maybe a quarterly basis, but the fragmentation could be problematic from the standpoint of process. And I know I'm a pain in the ass with process, and I know I know I'm say it a lot, but I've lived it, and just think about how that process is going to work and what's realistic.
Thank you, and I'll elevate the item C that we'll discuss here we'll also talk about where we are in that process. Is the board a good body to be involved in that, or do we seek a outside organization? Mr. Gladstone, I think you were going to add a comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just going to say a lot of fiscal years for smaller nonprofits seem to end, by September 30th. So October 1st is the beginning of a new fiscal year. I just was throwing that out as a point of information so much for our discussion so that we understand that that's typically the fiscal year. Also, when we start talking about numbers, I mean, today's economy, thousands of dollars can be spent easily if you're talking about a program or an initiative. It goes fast. The other thing would be, and this is more of a question for those in the room that run smaller nonprofits, what's a lot of money? What's a little bit of money to you that's still effective? What's a small amount that's still effective? Because you might say, well, we're going to give somebody $25,000, but if you can't really do anything worthwhile with it. So those are just points of discussion that might be helpful. Thank you.
Director Bobo.
I'd like to loop in what Mr. Rutherford said about the timing. When I advocated it, open all year, I don't mean submit at 365. I concur that major grants, again, should have like 2 cycles due on maybe May 1st and September or October 1st. And then every quarter, I think the smaller grants, because I agree, it's a lot of work to continuously review these and review these and review these. They should queue up for an every 3-month review or a major cycle review.
Mr. Green.
Thank you. I kind of with Mr. Rutherford was thinking, how long is this process going to take, the review process? I mean, some of our review process for our grants take 5 months, where others, can take a month. So I think that we need to kind of look at that and know before we can decide how often or when we need to do this. I initially came in today thinking twice a year would be appropriate. And I also was thinking, 1-year grants, but then, like Mr. Bobo said, having those with longer goals to have a longer time frame. So if you are trying to hire somebody, you have to write a job description, get that approved, market the position, do the interviews, and with that time frame, you've eaten up 3, 4, 5 months of a year grant, and then you don't have a lot of time for that person to, do the work that you've intended for them. So, having a 3-year grant option would be beneficial as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. King.
I do like the idea of having some in-between time grants, like if the Kalamazoo Community Foundation, for example, they have like twice a year their major grants, but then they have throughout the year up to a certain amount can be applied for. And so that could be a way to kind of distinguish some of those rolling grants versus the major grants. But I do agree with a 3-year, it's so cumbersome for especially small organizations to have to write grants every year. And especially if they don't have designated grant writers, that takes up staff time too. So there's a lot of challenges, I think, for some small organizations.
So I think what I'm hearing from the body at this point, certainly support for major grant opportunities twice a year with a preference for major grants and a longer cycle of 3 years. Do we have a sense of what timing through the year? Fiscal year's beginning in October, so potentially, looking for the grant application process. I don't think government moves quite at the speed of light, right? So need to give that some time because then there'll be contracting and et cetera. Deputy Administrator, do you have a sense of a general timeline? If the county, will have further discussion about that, but if the county is in the position of reviewing applications, is it a 4-month timeline from application to when it might be likely for contracting and resources to be able to be allocated out, or maybe 5 months? What do you think might be a reasonable time frame? Always putting poor Deputy Administrator Smith on the spot.
So it does depend on who is scoring the application. So I think if it's the Board of Commissioners scoring the applications during one of their regularly established meetings, it's a little bit more difficult. I think if there is an ad hoc committee formed from the Board of Commissioners, or if a continuation, however you want to define that ad hoc committee, then that may help expedite it a little bit. With the senior millage right now, we are testing out an expedited process, I would say, this cycle. So generally speaking, you want your application to be open for at least 3 to 4 weeks. And then at that point, you're going to want at least to give your scoring people and to convene a meeting and have a public notice, all of that. I would say a month for scoring and review and making decisions. And again, I feel like that is aggressive. And then you need to present those recommendations to the board, and then the board would vote on those recommendations. So best case scenario, if we're having an aggressive timeline, I would say this is a 3 to 4 month process, depending on how frequently people are able to meet and score the applications and come to a consensus of what to recommend to the Board of Commissioners. And then after that point, once the board approves awarding those applications, that's then when the contracting piece begins. And the contracting piece, we could have a start date of January 1, but maybe the contract doesn't get signed because we're waiting on the partners legal team to review it, especially if they have changes they want made. Then we have to go back and forth with our legal to come to conclude, an agreement there. I will say, as y'all are considering amounts, and again, this will be up to the Board of Commissioners to decide, but at this point in time, the administrator's agenda allows for signature of contracts that are 75,000 or less. Again, I think that this is something that we would want the Board of Commissioners to say, yes, we want to extend that to the administrator as agenda as well, if that's the direction I'll take for some of these opioid grant applications. But that is something to keep in mind. Anything above 75,000 must go to the board to enter into agreement with.
One more point of clarification, please, Administrator. We operate on a calendar fiscal year, as we've already heard, and we know many of our nonprofit and community-based partners operate on a fiscal year. And so is our contracting, are we in a position where we need to have contracts that become effective January 1st, or could we do contracting effective in October?
Yeah, we can enter into agreements at any point in time, but I think it's the preference of finance for us to continue to operate fiscally on our calendar year. So our January 1 through December 31. All of that to be said, we enter into contracts all the time that have an October 1st start date.
Well, I think there I would just lift up, we have a lot more resources to manage the administrative burdens than our nonprofits do. So I would lend to a friendly timeline for them, but Mr. Gladstone.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was going to say that one point jumped out to me, that the commissioners deciding on each of the individual grants, and I brought this up more than once, but I'll say it again for the record, that I believe a committee should be formed that has persons in long-term recovery, people that have some experience in the addiction space to grade those types of grants, because they know people in that space in the community, they know what people need, and they know the nonprofits who deliver it, and they know the system. So that would be encouraged greatly, that the Board of Commissioners not become the judgmental body. And I think it was Commissioner Vice Chair John Taylor that said, we're experts in running, infrastructure for a county. We're not experts in addiction.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you, Mr. Gladstone. I think it's likely that that will happen. It will take action from the board for that, but can't speak for the board, but I would expect it, would be in order. All right, so we've talked about the major grant cycle, the minor grant cycle. I'm hearing maybe opportunities on a quarterly basis that come up to begin applications. And maybe there's even hybrid approaches that could be used, the smaller community, quarterly grant cycles, maybe that is handled through a community foundation support, and major grants maybe could be done the same way, where they could be reviewed internally. I guess that will take us to discussion of item C. So do we have anything else that we want to add here on item A before I move us along? And why don't we take up item C? We'll come back to it. These just seem to sort of connect together a little bit. So as we're thinking through these timelines, let's look at item 5C next and consider question 6 for us. So here it's, should the county assume role of collaborator and when appropriate grant writer with community partners for state and federal funding opportunities? So as we've heard, we have folks within the county that, have extensive experience writing for state and federal grants. And that is much more of a burden for our nonprofit community-based partners. So what do we see a relationship looking like? What would be beneficial to advance the work in front of us? Director Rutherford.
So in terms of writing state and federal grants, that's a leveraging opportunity to take advantage of additional funding to address issues. A reminder, we have a full-time health educator that has experience in grant writing, that has the resources available with an epidemiologist, with support staff. So I wouldn't really want to reinvent what already exists in terms of, that resource being available. And then you'll have, internally within the county too, you have departments that have that skill set. I know that Ken's got, experience in that realm, but, it's going to depend upon what type of, funding you're seeking. That, sometimes it's a partnership between a local nonprofit and the county trying to, help provide service and support, for that initiative. But certainly the expertise exists and is readily available.
Director Bobo.
I just have a question on the question. Should the county assume the role of collaborator? Part 1. Should the county assume the role, when appropriate, of grant writer? So does that mean that the county, some person on the county payroll, is going to become a grant writer for a community entity that wants to apply, or help them write the grant? And same thing with the role of collaborator. Does someone on the county's payroll help them think it through, flesh it out, and make it come to fruition? Now, I don't really care. I mean, it's nice to help people out, but I'm just wondering if that's what is meant by the question, because it kind of sounds like it's meant by someone from the county, whether they volunteer or they're designated, is going to help other people, other entities write this.
I think in discussion and development of the resolution, that was a question, that the administrative burden of grant writing for some of the community-based organizations is a struggle. And so if there were resources that could be marshaled, but it also sounds like, the county could also be the lead grant applicant. And, we could have, what would you call them, Director? They're subcontracted relationships then when we're working with nonprofits. So it's our grant that they then are participating in with us. I guess both would be options. Ms. King.
I also question in that statement that says for state and federal funding opportunities. So is this beyond what we're talking about for the task force funding?
Yes. Leveraging those dollars up. Mr. Gladstone.
Thank you. I'm thinking like the county is going to help write a SAMHSA grant potentially. I know a SAMHSA grant can be a book quite thick. I just see a complex set of problems, potentially challenges, not necessarily roadblocks, but challenges for that type of grant writing. I do believe the county has a tremendous amount of resources to review something that is written and make suggestions. I was writing a grant myself, and I had 3 or 4 people that would look at what I had written and make notes and corrections and, hey, might want to say this differently and that sort of thing. So grant review would be helpful, but I just think that that one needs to be thought through very carefully, because if you've got 6 nonprofits that are now trying to apply for a large SAMHSA grant, that could be a tremendous burden on everybody, the nonprofit through to the county and those who are involved. Just a thought.
Dr. Ford.
Well, I know there's the state portal where they're supposed to put state opportunities. So I think the county playing a role in even like keeping an eye on that and letting people in the county know when funding is available. But because even just monitoring that as each small organization can be a challenge. And as far as collaborating, I mean, I think that would be a fantastic resource if the county is willing to do that. Like for an example I'm thinking of for our work with Nancy King and Cope Network through WMed and Bronson, we had those boxes, that the naloxone boxes you all heard about, that we have so many more in the county now. But like writing up more grants to further that type of work. There's just so much to do with naloxone education and various things. And at the med school, we don't have that sort of support for grant writing. We have a fantastic grant officer that like links us with opportunities, but it's the writing comes to us, like the doctors and the resident physicians. And I know, and we're a pretty resource heavy organization. So if you think about even smaller nonprofits, like, a lot of these grants, we want to collaborate as a community and bring people that are doing similar work together. So just having like a central person at the county level that was sort of collaborating with on us, and like Kendall knows so much of what we're doing now from her work, like, kind of putting the pieces together to make strong state and federal grants. I think it's a fantastic idea.
And, it hasn't been a use of the opioid settlement funds. Some of the initial allocations the board made was for the health educator position creation that supports Kendall's work. And so hearing the additional resources that HCS available and the opportunities. Did I see other comment? Okay, so what I'm hearing is yes, it would make sense for us to be collaborator and even lead grant writer. What about those opportunities lifted up by Mr. Gladstone about, that sort of mentorship with grant writing? If a community organization is working on a smaller grant, seeking feedback as a collaborator from the county, we see a value in that as well. Dr. Nettleton.
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure out question 6, to be honest. And what does that mean, like practically? Like, who is this? A person? Is this someone who is a member of an organization? I'm just trying to think. Is it just someone who has experience writing grant? That's what I'm trying to get my hands on. I mean, and the follow up to that is, has this been done in the past with other prior existing things that the county has done?
So let me see if I understand your question. So you're asking in that collaborating component, if Ms. Henry is here right next to me. Ms. Henry is working on a grant to support recovery housing. And that's going to go in for submission, maybe seeking feedback from Kendall as the health educator. These are examples. If metrics are identified, if the core components and objectives are clearly stated, and providing feedback to help a community-based organization that maybe hasn't done much grant writing, strengthen that so that they can then move forward with their submission. That would be my understanding of what we're talking about in that collaboration component. Does that make sense to you, Dr. Nelson?
Following now, has that been done in the past?
I don't know the answer to that.
Has that type of collaboration been done in the past?
I've used other people to bounce things off of. I think we probably all have talked to other entities to say, what do you think? How should I phrase this? What's the phrase du jour? I don't know how deep we get into helping write each other people's grants, but bouncing ideas off.
And I will say, I mean, it's not related, not necessarily grant, well, they are grants. The housing department, for example, does provide a lot of support, coaching, and refinement to applicants that come forward for the housing millage to help them strengthen details within their application as they come forward for review. We do that.
So some examples that I'm still trying to parse out the details, but like, for example, when others have approached the health department for data, for example, that's when we supply data to support whatever grant is being written for whatever reason. I mean, we've done that for some federal grants written in this county because we supplied that data. So that's already like a natural collaboration that's happened. In my other county that I serve, I helped write a grant with a local nonprofit for a private foundation that we collaborated on from our opioid coalition. But there wasn't like a set person at the county who was like, hey, a grant writer would do that. So that's what I'm trying to parse just to understand more clearly. And maybe it's already just a natural collaboration and this question is just a little redundant. I'm not sure.
Stoneward.
I'm tracking with you, Doctor, and I think that we need a protocol of some kind for Kendall if she's going to be the hub, right? We need, she can't do it alone. So what we would need is, I'm serious, because if she gets 6 grants coming in at once, does she have a potential team behind her to send this off to? So Dr. Nettleton is willing to review this. Mr. Bobo is willing to review this. So you just assign and have that team and say, okay, we've got a grant. I've reviewed it, send it off to the team, and it comes back. Does that make any sense? That you need to define who's going to look at it and who's going to collaborate with them. Now, after they read it, they may say, hey, I like what you're doing, but I think I've got a different angle that might help. And one of the persons on the team may get into a deeper collaboration. But if you just leave it open, like it's just everything's gonna come across Kendall's desk, I have a feeling that could get a little burdensome.
Chair,
Yes,
this is kind of getting
let
out of
me-
control in terms of my initial comment relative to what the grant writing responsibilities could or could not be. You know, what I envisioned when I addressed that question was more along the lines of the county applying for, and sometimes there'll be a partnership associated with that, depending upon the circumstances of the grant itself. Never did I envision that we're the grant writer for every nonprofit in the community. It's just not, that's not the case, and that's not what my suggestion was.
I'll lift up as well. We're speaking of the health educator's position as a hypothetical, entity within the county. But Ms. King was first, and then we would go to Ms. Henry. Ms. King.
So thinking back, I remember when we had the Healthy Babies, Healthy Start grants, and that had an individual, I thought it was a county individual that kind of like helped and oversaw and gave information and helped to kind of generate towards being able to write those grants for that program. And it was an individual, as I recall, I think it was Dave Artley helped at that point. So there wasn't an opportunity that kind of existed like that that was going specifically for that funding at that time that helped the organizations that were going to be applying for that to be able to kind of be cohesive in what we were doing in the community to make sure it was, we weren't overlapping and that the gaps were being filled.
Ms. Henry?
I like the collaboration, and so I'm going to kind of speak from an organization that's writing grants, and I'm new to grant writing, right? And so I've been searching through Kalamazoo and Atlanta and Texas, trying to find someone to help me write a grant. I've called Western. There is no one available to help small organizations like myself for me that is working on writing a grant. So for the collaboration, it would be excellent for us to have someone to shoot our grant to, or to be able to contact different individuals to give us input instead of trying to do this solo. Because a lot of times as new organizations, we don't know where to go. And we're working on the web, and the web is just so complex that at the end it's like, I don't want to do this. So if there is a collaboration within this forum or with the Board of Commissioners, having that collaboration, I think works well instead of just having multiple people. Like you said, we had Dave Artley, which was wonderful years ago, but that was for that particular. And so if we have someone, if you all are applying, if the BOC is applying for the grant, and then an organization knows that we can go to the BOC and they can help us. And some grants have said, oh, well, if there's a problem, then we'll notify you and work with you. And I haven't seen that happen. They call and say, hey, you need to maybe work on this piece and this piece. I haven't seen that in the last 2 years. So I embrace the collaboration.
So I think I'm gleaning a couple of things from our discussion, but I want to point a question again to Deputy Administrator. Going through budget discussion, Administrator's recommended budget will be coming forth to the board shortly. Do you know, or can you recall if there's been an identified position creation for a grant writer within the county?
I do not recall. I'm leaning towards no. I don't think that a department brought that forward as a new funding request.
Okay.
But I can double check that.
Thank you. So what I'm hearing is that there is expertise within the county. There's data, there's the epidemiology support, et cetera. And I'm also hearing from community-based partners that there is support needed, and a learning curve for a skill set to successfully seek grants, but that trying to collaborate all of that would be very cumbersome. So it would really need a dedicated position if the county were going to explore that, right? So, I mean, is that a question before us? Is that worth the county exploring? Would some opioid settlement funds, creating support for grant writing, a person just to engage in that work, be effective use of these resources? Ms. King.
I think that there is also a big difference between some of the smaller, because we're sitting here at the table together looking at the different organizations, but when this opens up, there are going to be a lot of organizations that are like, oh, we can help to expand what we're doing, that are small based compared to some of these large organizations that have been doing this for a lot of years, writing very large grants. And I think that could be very beneficial to seeing how those smaller opportunities are able to grow within our community.
Dr. Bobo.
Along the same vein, with those smaller opportunities and part of the grant review process, it might be incumbent to identify these smaller requests, being able to slot into a larger request, or vice versa. So there's a synergistic effect of those who coming together as one, as collaborating partners under a grant, instead of separate ones, which are kind of running parallel, but the tracks may cross and then they may perform a divergence also. So that kind of follows up, and I think that would make good sense.
Ms. Green.
So I'm struggling with this. And I'm going to do my best to kind of explain it. I want to go back to Dr. Nettleton's question of, have we had this before? And Dave Artley and Director Rutherford, you can probably speak more to this because I think you've been here longer and wouldn't remember Dave Artley. No, I'm not saying that. You've been here longer. You're more experienced. You're wiser. But I came on right when Dave was wrapping up. And so I feel like it wasn't just for Healthy Babies, Healthy Start. And that's why I'm Director Rutherford. You can probably speak to it, but I feel like he was a grant writer for the county. So that's kind of answering that question, and maybe Director Rutherford can fully answer it. But I'm struggling with this because I feel like we're here to discuss the opioid settlement funds. And yet we're looking at a question that is in regard to state and federal opportunities. So I feel like it's kind of taking us away from what we're here for. While I feel like it's an important question to have, I don't know if it's really for our body to kind of discuss. And maybe I'm just misunderstanding
Let
it.
me just speak to that because it's in the resolution from the board. It is one we are tasked to answer
Okay.
for them.
Okay.
So we can say, you know, we don't think this is a use of the opioid settlement fund. You know, we don't think this is a viable use, but it is one that
Okay.
we've been tasked to answer.
Thank you. I will also say I feel like the smaller organizations that don't have experience writing grants need assistance. But we also talked at length last month about, while this and many times I should say, while this seems like a large amount of money that our county is getting, when Lindy, I think you broke it down for us, it's really not a lot of money. And so to take, you know, 100,000 plus for salary and fringes for a position out of that is concerning to me. And so there are resources in the community to help individuals learn how to write grants and access grants, which I had to take part of when I started my position because I was clueless. I had no experience in writing grants. So I think that there are things out there. Are they perfect? Are they, you know, the answer to the problem? I don't think so, but they're a definite support. I'm just concerned that we would be taking, you know, 100,000 plus away from things. So, but I do think smaller organizations do need some kind of collaboration and support.
Director Rutherford.
So, you know, Artley's role wasn't limited to just HCS. He wrote grants for a lot of different departments and most likely external, you know, support as well. But I do believe, you know, we have to ask ourselves, and this is meant with all due respect, if you have an individual that is struggling writing a grant, there may be some struggles implementing the grant as well. So it may not be just limited to support in terms of writing said grant, but it's also managing that grant. And it's important that you do give smaller nonprofits an opportunity for the capability to perform that role. Is it, you know, but that's not limited to people that are in this realm. It's limited to people that are in a lot of different realms within the community. So is that more of a discussion with KVCC, Western Michigan University, to offer, you know, grant writing and grant management at, you know, little to no cost? You know, that those are, I think, are investments in nonprofits, smaller nonprofits in the future. You know, is that best performed, you know, with these resources? I don't have an answer to that, but I do believe that there's a process. I got to stop using that word. There's an opportunity. You've got great learning institutions in the community that would, I think, be willing to partner to create, you know, those opportunities for learning.
Mr. Gladstone.
Just one comment on what I just heard. A lot of what I worked with nonprofits for almost 20 years, working with smaller nonprofits, getting contract work and helping them. And the problem that I heard over and over again working with nonprofits is not that they couldn't do the work. It's that they don't have time. When you've got 3 people working in an organization that's, you know, doing all this work, they're doing the work. And then this opportunity comes up to get $150,000 from SAMHSA or $200,000 from SAMHSA so they could actually perhaps expand. And the problem is that I haven't got time to write that grant that's that thick. So it's not that they can't execute it. They're not business savvy. They've been too busy doing the business. Now, larger organizations have a department they can send it to. Being self-employed as a one-person company, I didn't have a department to send it to. I was the chief cook and bottle washer. So you have to think that through, and that's why they need the money, and that's why they need the opportunities to make sure that this money just doesn't go to the big guns and can go to the smaller ones that are doing great work but need a leg up. Thank you.
So if I maybe let me see if I can coalesce us here if we need further comment. I think what I'm hearing from the body is that there would be tremendous benefit to the county being able to support grant writing, to have a grant writer available, but the opioid settlement resources would not be our recommendation to utilize for that position. Perhaps the board could consider a grant writer within the broader structure of county government, and that seeking resources from educational institutions, other nonprofit partners with experience to provide assistance in grant writing to community-based organizations would also be our recommendation and a benefit to the community. If we, Ms. Henry, go ahead.
You know, I don't think it's necessarily writing the grants for us. I think it's assisting us with a lot of the wording, a lot of the data. So I'm not saying that we need someone to sit and literally write the grant. We need assistance. And I'm not just talking about me, because I can write a grant. It's just certain areas I need assistance with. And so I don't mean create a position just strictly for writing the grant for those that would apply, but where within the community that you all can help us. So if I contact you and I say I need some data on individuals, females, Black or BICOLE that have OD'd in 2024 to write into my grant, can you assist me with that data? Or can I pass that grant to someone else and they kind of look it over, and then they kind of like just write in or tweak or say, hey, Brenda, maybe you want to contact this person to get this data, but not necessarily creating an overall position, but collaborating together to do this work. Because if we don't get help writing the grants and getting the data, then we can't do the work. And so the opioid dollars is not going to be effective within our community if we can't get the grant properly written, proper verbiage, which all grants require. I can't write that in the 8th grade, writing. I've got to have some professionalism to that grant. If we as a community do not get these dollars based upon the scoring, then the work is never going to get done effectively. We've just got money that's going out. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Henry. Right, and move us on to our next topic. Deputy Administrator.
Sorry, just because I'm drafting y'all's report, I need to know exactly how to answer this question. So can I get a little guidance here?
Sure. So let me lift up, and then my colleagues here can help me refine if needed. So should the county assume the role of collaborator when appropriate and a grant writer with community partners for state and federal funding? That answer would be yes. The opioid settlement funds are not recommended to fund a position to support that work, but there would be benefit to it within the county structure. And our recommendation, I think, would either be to support, the county should consider supporting a grant writer. And then also, I think the other point is that maybe we identify someone within the existing county structure that can just be a community resource to help direct nonprofits where to go for help. Commissioner Pro Tem Epler, Vice Chair Pro Tem, sorry. It's a mouthful, you know.
Just say Jeff. That
Okay.
works better. I'm easy. I've been listening and I totally agree. And I think we've hit on all the points. Maybe not using opioid or all of the opioid or a large portion of it, but a grant writer for the county is probably a good position for many departments within the county. And I think that might be something appropriate to talk to administration about as far as that goes. I think we have to understand that these opioid monies are not. Ms. Green brought up that point. I brought it up several times. It's not a lot of money. And when you're trying to stretch it out, trying to bring in additional funds to help with this problem from state and federal funds is, I think, tremendous. It'll expand it and help us help more folks. So I think the answer is yes, we need to do this. We need to look at how we can help some of the smaller entities get more funding from other sources so that we can grow that resource out and help our departments, our health departments and our many of our other entities, our fire and police too, and medical, with preventing these things and working with our citizens. So I would say yes, and I'd support us working to get with administration to consider getting or look into the departments and see if there isn't some other or somebody there or hiring somebody to help us with grants, not just for this, but for many of our other organizations within the county structure government.
I think the other thing I've heard, and I'll clarify if Mr. Gladstone has to add, as Director Rutherford lifted up, and when we are exploring current state or federal funding, if there are opportunities to bring nonprofits into existing grant cycles, that we encourage that collaboration across the community. Deputy Administrator.
And then just real quick, the other thing I feel like I'm really hearing, and I want to make sure it's okay, I include this wording in there, but it sounds like technical assistance. And so technical assistance grant or a technical assistance contract with a consultant that we could utilize something in that way. So if I go in that direction with the answer. Okay.
Do you have something to add briefly, Mr. Gladstone?
There we go. I'll be brief, but this is probably an important point to make from the perspective of the whole situation with addiction in general. The opioid settlements provided us with a series of settlement funds coming in. But what we have, because of all the brain power in this room and all the other people that are involved in deciding how the settlement should get spent, what we have is a tremendous once in a lifetime, I've said that on the state level, and I'll say it here, a once in a lifetime opportunity to address the addiction crisis. Now, I know we have some rules and regulations we got to follow and Schedule E and all of that, but like the grant writing thing, we've discovered something that would be valuable to our community. So what we have here are opportunities like that with our group to make a dent in the addiction crisis. And I'll emphasize that we shouldn't just look at Band-Aids, but what can we do to get to the root of the problem? Stable housing, recovery coaches, all these other components. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we're all in philosophical agreement there, Mr. Gladstone. Let's move us back to question 7, if we can, and not to move. Deputy Administrator, do you feel you have clarity from the body? All right, let's back us up to item B, which was question 7. I moved us past. Here is a community-wide prevention and education campaign needed to promote destigmatization of opioid use and of people seeking help for it. Ms. King.
We can't stop with all the stigma stuff that's out there. We recently lost another individual who is a recovery coach. And I think that as long as there's stigma, people in recovery, if they have a return to use, have even more shame than somebody who's in active use. And so it takes this approach to understand the underlying connections and causes to substance use disorder and addiction, and not just focus in on the use of substances or the behaviors that are associated with it. Because if we don't have this destigmatization, it's not going to help people to get this help and support they need, and it's not going to help people in recovery who may be struggling for whatever reason to be able to get, you know, the support they need at that time. We know that there are professional organizations specifically for like NA and AA, because they don't want to be seen in the community as a professional having struggling with addiction. And for our recovery coaches and our peer mentors, I think that's a really critical piece that's been overlooked. We've lost many peer mentors and recovery coaches throughout the state over the years. And I think some of that falls into how they're feeling and the stigma that's associated with even a return to use.
Dr. Nelson.
My answer to this question is yes.
I vote yes.
Mr. Gladstone.
I, of course, vote yes. Stigma is like my main soapbox. But I would change one thing in here for the sake of the report. It is needed, but can we take opioid use and destigmatize addiction? I don't think there's anything in Schedule E, I've read through it, that says we can't address other issues. There is actually a statement that we can expand that. So yes, we want a countywide prevention and promotion campaign for destigmatization for addiction, period. All substances. Alcohol still killing more people than the opioid crisis, and we don't even talk about it anymore. Thanks.
We definitely can within Exhibit E address co-occurring issues. And so, you know, maybe that's being mindful within the language. Do we have any other thoughts or insight that we want to provide about this campaign that we know is needed? Dr. Ford.
I agree 100%, but I'd like to see it say for people seeking help for it and their families, because I feel like that they need support or something like that, like broaden that part a little bit, just so people know there's just a lot of stigma that families feel around it also. And I think including that. And then I love the idea of doing this. It should be community-wide. It should be out there in front of everybody. But there's also like focused training that needs to continue on the healthcare provider side about how much of this is there and how dangerous it is for our patients.
Dr. Nelson.
Fully agree with Dr. Ford in that her additions supplement what we already have for our County Opioid Coalition objective. And so there would be alignment adding the families there, expanding it for addiction in general. And I think any type of campaign would need to be, in general, the communication specialist would focus on, is this a community general focus? Are we gonna have some target audiences as well, such as healthcare?
Director Rutherford.
So I'm just going to pull the microscope back a little bit. When we talk about prioritization, I certainly agree that that's should be a significant priority up front. But I remind us that we need to really set forth the priorities of what our expectations are when the grants when the RFPs go out, for instance. So when we do this in the AAA program, as you saw yesterday during Don Saldia's presentation, there's a certain percentage of funding that's allocated for different approaches and different topics, subjects that they want to approach, you know, living at home, meals. So they prioritize, and then they attach a percentage of the amount of revenue that's available for that grant cycle. They attach a priority and a percentage to each of those. And what it prevents is the tail wagging the dog. And we need to kind of know up front, what do you want to spend this money on? And then build that into the messaging to the people that are seeking the funds, that this is what we're, otherwise you're going to get everything under the sun. And maybe that's the approach that the county wants to take. But in order to really coincide with strategic planning, that's probably important for us to say, well, what do we want to stress is important, and what do we want to prioritize in advance of letting out the RFPs?
And if I can clarify, Dr. Ruther, are you talking about the overall spending buckets, or are you speaking here about specifically what we're messaging in the education?
No, I'm talking further back in terms of the buckets. Certainly the stigma is a pretty important thing up front. I mean, people need to really get beyond that to be effective in the work that we do. So that's certainly a big priority up front. But I think that we need to kind of determine in advance of letting out the notice of funding availability, what it is we want to be focusing on in that respective grant cycle.
Thank you for that. I think, you know, also hearing Ms. King lift up, you know, that risk to healthcare workers, recovery coaches, and that destigmatization campaign, you know, lifting up how relapse is part of living with addiction. It is an expected part of the cycle to face relapse at times, to move back into recovery with support. And so recognizing, you know, people don't need to be consumed with shame when relapse occurs, because it often does. And we need to be able to support people and their families when that happens. Dr. Nelson.
So if more specificity is needed, so we did a grant in Calhoun County about 6 years ago on stigma reduction countywide. Our focus was on destigmatization of the language around addiction, including families. The second was on destigmatizing medications for opioid use disorder. And then the third that we could do maybe here in Kalamazoo County is a target for professional audiences, because we hear that a lot in our opioid coalition and healthcare. So that could be some specificity. Sounds like Nancy has one more, but those are the three, and maybe a fourth example that could help target whoever would like to tackle the community-wide campaign.
Ms. King.
I do want to add harm reduction. Although MAT often falls under harm reduction, we also have to realize that people use drugs, and not everybody who uses drugs or engages in other behaviors, for that matter, ends up with addiction. But that harm reduction approach of understanding that people's change takes time and not just an abstinence only perspective.
Deputy Administrator.
The only thing I just want to add, and it's not necessarily so I have the answer to your question, which is yes, with the changes that y'all have requested. But I guess just want to lift up in the draft report that I provided a while back, I did make a note of, you know, within the Health and Community Services Department, the health educators in general are adapted to overseeing education campaigns, and community-wide prevention campaigns. So the question isn't to the group of who, and maybe it is part of the application process, as Director Rutherford was speaking to, but I did just want to elevate that a little bit, as far as within the public health department, our health educators do oversee education campaigns when there is funding available. And I don't know if even Dr. Nettleton could speak to who was overseeing the campaign that Calhoun County did.
It was me, and we contracted with a marketing firm and worked with the community partner for messaging.
So it was primarily it was a collaboration then between the Calhoun County Health Department and a community partner.
It was using state funds for stigma reduction campaign through the health department, and the health department subcontracted for the marketing, and we elicited input from our local opioid coalition.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that that process was clear to everyone.
Also lift up, I know within the community, the regional PIHB also does some community education campaigns. They can target segments of the population in specific education campaigns. I don't know, Mr. Gladstone, at the state level, do you know any other approaches to these sort of community education efforts that have been discussed there, or the state is engaging in, that maybe share briefly?
Really don't have an enormous amount because we were still trying to decipher some of what happened with the state budget that went through 3 or 4 iterations and finally got approved. And I know the Opioid Advisory Commission has expressed their concern about the fact that it looked like they just chopped it in equal amounts and said, here, you guys figure it out, kind of thing, with DHHS. So I'm not sure, but it would be coming out of probably DHHS. I do know, and it is, I'm able to say at this point that SWIMBA is receiving a chunk of money, and they will determine internally how they choose to deliver that to the community. It'll probably be some sort of grant process. But as far as specific campaigns for destigmatization, I can't really speak to what DHHS is going to come out with. I do want to add one thing that I would caution people to hire. If you're hiring a marketing firm, make sure that there's somebody reviewing the materials that is in recovery. Because when, I don't know about you, but when I saw this is your brain on drugs, and the egg went down, all I could think of is that would be good with bacon. It was absolutely went over my head with messaging like the fried egg. Sometimes marketing companies come up with brilliant ideas, but don't necessarily hit the mark with the target audience. It could be a brilliant campaign, but it's got to hit home.
Right, thank you for that discussion. I move us forward to item D. Let's look at question number 10. Here we're tasked with answering, how should the co-occurring substance use disorders and mental health disorders be considered with this funding? So I'll elaborate a moment there, would, just off the top of my head, a suggestion, grant applicants that address co-occurring issues receive additional points for doing that. For example, what sort of weight or importance do we want to levy, and maybe how do we identify that importance in the process? Director Bobo.
I don't know about points, but I suppose in the grand scheme of things, I think we're all looking at these grants to see which ones are going to leverage the most, give us the biggest bang for the buck. So obviously, if we're looking at mental health and housing and opioid use, the more things that are going to be leveraged probably are going to be viewed better. But in its stark sense, yes, I think that they should be considered together, because I think everybody probably would agree that there's not too many people who have one without the other. Probably I'm sure there are, but it's going to be a very small slice of the pie. So I don't see how you can do it one without the other.
Mr. Gladstone.
Thank you. I think you have to look at co-occurring, and especially trauma. In close to 20 years of personal recovery myself, I've met an awful lot of people who've come in and out of various programs. Some have stayed, some are no longer with us. Some, have succeeded greatly in turning their lives around, and you'd never know they were in recovery unless they said something about it, because of stigma. But most of the people I've met and had a conversation with have had some sort of trauma. There is a small handful that will get up to a microphone, tell their story, and say, I had a great family, everything was going smoothly, and I just started drinking or started doing drugs, and it all went downhill. There's a small percentage of stories like that, but a lot of the stories are trauma, sexual assault, depression, anxiety, all sorts of co-occurring. So I would definitely be a proponent of anything that would support co-occurring disorders, and especially addressing trauma.
Dr. Nelson.
I think I almost want to just refer back to whatever the opioid settlement funds state are allowed, because 10 or 11, these co-occur with folks with substance use disorders. So for me, the answers to these questions, I would refer back to whatever the limitations for the opioid settlements say they are, and Exhibit E or what are outlined in the distribution of funds.
I think they're encouraged more than really limited, as long as they're it's a viable use of the dollars to address co-occurring issues, right? Ms. King.
I think the challenge of this question is the word how. I think that's, we all agree. And I think almost every organization who works with people with substance use disorder are dealing with the mental health piece to it as well, the trauma pieces to it as well. So I think the challenge of this question is, how are these going to be looked at?
Agreed. And to that, do you have any thoughts on what you think? I mean,
I always have the answers.
of course, I know they are complex. Mr. Gladstone.
I would just say that's up to people like yourself who run an organization that has the idea. Put that in your grant proposal and say, hey, we're going to hand out Narcan, train people how to use it. We're going to also offer recovery services and hand out, meeting lists. If somebody wanted to make a life change, we're going to, hand you off to a warm handoff to somebody who might get you housing if you're unhoused. Those are the kind of ideas that the organizations need to come up with. The how. We're here tasked with just is the door open for that, I believe. And from an advisory standpoint, this is an advisory board. The county commissioners are going to get our report, read it, and decide how to spend the money. The how of it is up to the individual organizations, the smaller organizations, the bigger organizations who can address the how of it, but we should open the door for them.
So wouldn't that be in the RFP? I think that's where that is kind of addressed, looking at the bigger picture of, substance use disorder, including mental health trauma issues. That's part of what we could look at when setting up an RFP.
Ms. Henry.
And like you said, it's the how, because when I look at the services that's already being provided in Kalamazoo, we have ISK and we have community healing centers. So we already have the resources to do that. One of the things in the how is the CPSS and the recovery coaches. And I'm not just a recovery coach, but I'm a life and a health coach. And so how do we provide individuals with lived experiences to work alongside? Because we're missing that in the community. It's hard to find the CPSS and the recovery coaches for mental health and substance abuse. And that's one of the hows to address working with the population that we're talking about. We're missing that.
So what I'm hearing here for question 10 is it's yes, very clearly yes. And that in general, we would like to see grant applications that prioritize this sort of work, prioritized, that they have a preference in funding. So if those things are addressed, that there's more value to them. Is that agreement here? Great. Okay. Yes, please, Dr. Port.
This is a little out of place for this question, but it brings to mind, like, as far as prioritizing things, one of the five principles, like the top 5 principles, is to focus on racial equity too. So it may be another question we're going to address, but since it's coming to my mind while we're doing this and I don't recall all of the questions, I just wanted to bring that up too, because in a similar way in the RFP, I think that we need to make sure we're asking organizations to focus on that and give priority to organizations that are going to impact people of color and with their overdose deaths rising higher, etc. So anyway, I just had to say that, even though it was sort of out of place, just to make sure we're going to address it later.
No, thank you. Very important to lift up. I appreciate you doing so. And I think maybe that we can continue on that comment. We're to our last 15 minutes. So we may not get through full discussion on question 11, but here we're being asked, should settlement funds be used to provide trauma-informed, culturally competent mental health services to adults and children been impacted by the loss of a loved one due to opioids? So while it's not addressing, you know, specifically the racial components or inequity, when we're talking about cultural competency in our approaches, you know, it touches on what we're talking about. Ms. King, go ahead.
And this goes back to the stigma. You know, I know as a family member affected, as a parent, my first thought was, I'm a bad parent. My daughter's a heroin addict. So I think that it's important that we look at that from that destigmatization, because a lot of times they don't reach out for the grief help because they've lost a loved one. And that's a huge part of all of it wrapping together.
So let me, well, do we have any other comments we want to lift up here? Okay, for Deputy Administrator, do you have any more direction you'd like to seek from us on question 11?
I was kind of hearing when y'all were talking about question 10 and 11 maybe being answered together. So yes to both of them, that you would like to see that prioritization. Maybe it is within, I shouldn't say maybe, but we look at that within the grant application. And when we put that out and we say what the priorities are, we hit on, you know, is this proposal or project addressing co-occurring substance use disorders, is it, or mental health? You know, we ask for that equity lens. You know, are you addressing or does this address, you know, trauma informed in any sort of way, or any marginalized communities, and just maybe building that into the prioritization of the application and therefore the scoring matrix as well.
I think, and I want to lift up here, I think question 10 too is talking about not just the individual who's been impacted by substance use, but also the if a family member, you know, the children of someone who has died from an opioid overdose, what are we doing to support that child, that parent? So those mental health supports. And yeah, I lost my train of thought a little bit there, but just that it's not just the individual, the in use or out of use, but the family. Mr. Gladstone?
Just a quick thought on cultural competence and equity and that sort of thing. Also, from a communications and marketing perspective, for a number of years, different audiences use different tools and respond to different messages. So just kind of a sidebar note is that if we're going to do a destigmatization campaign, perhaps the Hispanic community versus the Black and brown community versus the Asian community versus the Jewish community versus, you know what I mean? It needs some different messaging. Just saying we did 10 billboards around Kalamazoo, we've done our job, check box and move on, is not good enough. We need that continual things that Ms. King does and Ms. Conway does to be in front of people and constantly delivering a message. So just some thought to actually really accomplish some equity and some competency in the area. We have to look at different messaging and different opportunities that present themselves there. I don't know where that fits into the report, but it should be something that, you know, if we're going to do a campaign, that we don't just say, oh, we bought 10 billboards. Thanks.
Right. Thank you. We've had quite a productive discussion today. We have a couple minutes. I want to circle back to question 4, where we were talking about the timelines. And I think we consolidated down major grants twice a year, smaller grants maybe each quarter. I don't think we gave much guidance about when those occur during the year. We talked about nonprofits being on that October 1 fiscal cycle. So I just want to circle back, see if anybody has wants to add a specific recommendation. The board can sort it out on their own if that's what we want them to do. Any last thoughts on that?
Well, I guess
Director
we're going
Bobo?
4 times a year, January, March, June, September, whatever every 3 months is. That's, if we're doing it twice a year, I advocate doing it when we're not writing the major grants. So making the big ones due, maybe not in May, but in maybe July 1st, something like that.
Yeah, I think July 4th weekend would be a good one. Just, you've got from the 1st of July to the 5th of July to complete your grant. Little levity to break the.
Well played, Mr. Gladstone. Right. Okay, do you need anything further on that item, Deputy Administrator?
Just so I write it correctly, when we say that it's going to open, that it's twice a year or quarterly, that's when it's opening up and the process, and so that initial process is starting, or that is when it is due? So is it due in July or is it opening up in July? Okay.
I say due January 1, due on whatever, due the first day of that month. And then rolling back to what Lindy had to say, if we have this ad hoc committee, they spend a month reviewing it, another 2 weeks to get it to the board. So you're looking at a 6 to 8 week cycle to spit them out.
Okay. And so, okay, that helps. So, and just so I make sure I understand the twice a year releasing the major grants, I think the only other thing that I would ask y'all, and I don't know if this is for this meeting or next, but my notes I have from the last meeting is when we were looking at the budget scenario, everyone liked maybe the scenario 1 the most, which just as a refresher, that's roughly, I'm rounding, which finance loves when I do that, but it's rounding up about a $900,000 budget, subtracting out already what those internal requests are. So we're looking at roughly a $600,000 annual budget. Whether that starts January 1, it sounds like we really want that to start October 1, but it's a $600,000 budget. We would allocate some of that to be for larger, and then some of that funding to be awarded quarterly. Okay. And then do we have any direction of what that is?
What a large grant would be and what a small grant would be? Next agenda. Yeah, I agree. Maybe we have some more in-depth discussion on that. Good. Thank you, Deputy Administrator, for your diligent work and patience with us. All right, so we are down to our last few minutes. So this is time for your update for us, Deputy Administrator.
Yes, just real fast. So Commissioner Strebs already talked about this a little bit. So our mini grants will be opening up on September 10th. I believe we're going to send out the press release on Thursday. So people will have a little bit of a heads up, meaning this Thursday. So people have a little bit of a heads up that those grants are opening up September 10th with the Kalamazoo Community Foundation, and will be open for 3 weeks. And then the scoring with the anticipated award date being, I believe it was either the end of October or beginning of November. So that's some exciting news that those will be getting out. And then I did just include in the packet, this is going to be part of that mini grant application, but it is a crosswalk for the settlement priorities within Exhibit E and putting those into categories. Just kind of a visual aid to kind of help narrow down Exhibit E a little bit more. Actually, this was provided to me from Diane Schaefer with an ISK, and I've just expanded upon it a little bit more to include all of the Exhibit E headers in there. This might be something that y'all want to look at as again, as we next time talk about the budget and funding priorities, as Director Rutherford talks about, where we want to focus in some of the, if it's a percentage or dollar amount. I think this will be a helpful, at least visual aid for y'all to look at. If not, maybe something that we use a little bit more widely. In here, you're also going to see that I did add in on the side, which I'll expand upon a little bit more, that throughout these applications, what we're looking for is to ensure that equity and that community collaboration. I think that what I heard from y'all as well is the responses to question 10 and 11 is that we're also looking for that co-occurring substances or addictions and focus. So I will be modifying this, but I think for the time being, it's a good visual aid for y'all to be looking at and considering as we move into the budget discussions and those funding buckets too.
Thank you, Mr. Gladstone.
First, for the record, thank you so much, Ms. Smith, for your efforts, continued efforts, always keeping things organized and keeping the lines of communication open. Thank you. Quick question that I'll pose publicly for the record is just, has the decision been made for the grant scoring committee to include a person who A, knows the addiction space in our community, and B, has a lived experience, perhaps in recovery from addiction, so that they may be able to guide some of the grant grading process?
So that question that was brought forward with the Board of Commissioners. They expressed some interest in having, you know, initially it was, do we have commissioners sit on that scoring application, or do we have, to your point, someone with more of a lived experience or within even this task force? So I think that's something that the commissioners are interested in. We tabled that for a time period, but this is a great time for a reminder that we probably need to bring that back up, and that decision needs to be made so that we can let the foundation know. They're very open to however many seats that to a degree, you know, I think we said 3 seats, but they're open to having the, you know, up to those 3 seats available to be a part of the scoring process with their community impact committee.
Thank you. And Deputy Administrator, in that discussion as well, did the Community Foundation, if I'm recalling, did they also lift up that they have in their review committee someone connected?
No,
Okay.
in my initial conversation, they did also elevate that as that would be a need, is to have someone within this work serving on that committee, that's not necessarily where their expertise 100% falls.
Thank you so much. So we'll do a follow-up on that and determine how we support the work of that scoring committee. Thank you again for lifting that up. Is there anything else for the good of the order?
Just
Director
one
Etheridge.
parting thought is that it's important, I hope, that and Dominic alluded to the brain trust that exists within not only this committee, but the other pre-existing committee. I think it's so important for decision-making to be positioned around the recommendations of groups like this, because these are people that have been through it. These are people that work with it. And you know, knowing this board, they're going to be seeking out, you know, this level of input. So continue to push forward. Thank you.
Thank you as well. All right. Thank you all for your time and the dialogue today. Much appreciated. With that, we are adjourned.